BLUEBEAM, Draft 1. I want to believe. Our bodies, offered in surrender, retreat to the worship of their central flaw, the grain of sand that births the hiding pearl. The ordinance of fate assaults the trenches of insurgent dreams. Chemistry cages ethereal strands of consciousness in idols of dust. In the dark safety of a basement, racked by a stranded storm, the nearby TV screen a squared cataract, blind to its own noise, a child sits, arms folded around his knees. The sky erupts with the faceless nightmare of the primal real, the clarion of an ongoing, never-ending Armageddon. Indifferent sonic eruptions rattle rows of bowing streetlights, bent like lantern-bearing monks, the friendless waymen guiding earthbound travelers from dissociative odysseys back to the city, a stoic regiment in calm defiance of the night. What lights will guide us from the seed beds of our launch pads to the lanterns of the stars, to nebulae of blazing mists, across the thresholds of lost planets freed from life? What monks chant in practiced tones to grant us passage through the arcane gateways of forgotten gods? What ruins crane and crack against the wraiths and wraths of time, contorting to remind us in silent warning of the many pasts we narrowly escaped? What nostalgic comforts will we bring to warm the cabins of our life pods? What songs will we sing? What stories tell? Where will our golden sails bear us, blown by the winds of light? What will we have become, we who have tasted enough death to cut out our tongues, heard enough final cries to break our ears, borne enough pain to add a toggle switch to every nerve? What will we sacrifice to scrape ourselves from the bedrock of our birth world, to devour the last of our terrestrial placenta? How much more must we suffer to escape the stagnant music of slow death? Beyond this rock, bleak leagues of matter drift, myriad hells and heavens, each unready for the hunger of our shattered souls. Each tide carries the moon over the dim hills in her view, into the mountainous mines behind the waiting eyes of sleep. Her face glints in our knotted dreams, offers sparse visions of a rising galaxy, a morning of 400 billion suns. What species could witness this unknown and think it fruitful, think itself entitled to the whims of curiosity? When you claim joy, measure your claim against the teary-eyed photo of Armstrong, hair matted with sweat from his excursion beyond all myths. When you claim stoicism, measure your claim against the halo of blood that hovers above every human breath, from the first of us besieged by consciousness to the first gasp of the last infant to be born. Are we the sole barometer of life? Some compass light left flickering behind the dilated pupil of the universe? Will we fade like the shapes you saw when you were young and pressed your fingers lightly at first into your eyes so you could watch hallucinations morph against the vascular backdrop of your eyelids like virtual bruises, writing and blooming in pastel blues and metallic greens. We follow what we call truth, as if it were a long-dead star, whose image guides us for a time, but when we near it, we can only watch it die more vividly. Our only path to freedom is to learn how to believe our lies. Lithopanspermia. Venus, the mother. In bowls of stone, life boils into being. Wombs of brine teem with amino acids, the blueprints of builders and destroyers. Alien probes extract warped proteins from vaults, defiled by lithic incursions that unfurled and exposed irreplaceable scrolls of life, jostled stone shelves, and disturbed subsurface masterworks whose resilience taunts fragile flesh. Crystal orchards, cut off from mineral-rich water, freeze-dry in cavernous tableaus. Films of grit conceal the stalled growth cycles of geodes, their fang-crowded innards huddled in desperate stasis. Invasive liquids, acids, ashes, magmas, sands, and silts rend vibrant clans of proto-life. Fractured by manic acts of geology, gems scatter in a flack of particulates, each grain seeking to infect new networks with its mineral code. Chasms rife with such fractal tapestries revert to fractions when faced with erasure. Even in death, they forge elaborate galleries that reflect the cauldrons of their births, urging the mouth of chaos to vomit up new orders. Life drifts up from this hell into nutrient-rich clouds, an exodus preserved in genetic memory. Venus waves flags of flame from her pyrophoric pores, praying for these motes, her fleeing children. A fleet of meteors approaches her. The barrage propels microbes beyond her atmosphere. These fledgling astronauts, encased in debris, hurtle towards dark trajectories. 2 nearby planets receive these voyagers, bequeathed to them as their mother spins in acrid fog and fire. Young Earth and old Mars, children of soul, compete to harbor life. Earth, the daughter. Fall trees disrobe, shedding their leaves in bits of rough-strewn wreaths, each one self-severed in service to settling mulch. Roots hide, while trunks endure the branches' grudges and the flowers' fruiting boasts. Gold sighs as it waits in the earth. Notions of inherent beauty promote states of patience feeding stasis and demands for subtlety. Crystal prisons have been reconfigured into more palatable forms, bodies more prone to sleep for want of pleasurable dreams. What tool succeeds in prodding you awake? Is it a hissing clock or some genetic jolt? This cosmic hearth is a temporary playpen. All the life of Earth shows love to its fellow permutations by offering to share pain risking torture and death to join in sensory rapture. How can we be worthy of such mindless love, never asked for? Oh, Mother, the starlight calls. What an odd sensation, to know that we have outgrown your only true form of love, a merciful manipulation so insidious that this description only further validates it. In facing this truth, we wonder if naked war is more pure, more honest. We look to the past, desperate for alternatives. Old Mars stares through space, flinging its dust, like a magician hiding tricks behind flash powder. We pine for an old kind of pain made new, our blood squirming in our veins, aching to escape, to spill itself on glorious fields in service to some passing ideal or some master's whim, or to some collective passion, thrashing at the seams of an order that clothes chaos in weary routines. Peace breeds boredom, boredom lethargy, lethargy complacency, complacency frustration, frustration friction, and friction fresh conflicts. Mars, the sun. A planetary crust constrains lithovascular veins of magma, oil, gas, and water, networks of transmission hidden beneath a sand-scoured shell. Remnants of magmatic streams that gravity once decreed to be drained, to fill igneous urns, embed hypnotic black glyphs in landscapes critical to life. Trails of faded blood trace paths to dead oases, lithic locales encoded in dry veins of silica. Faint signs of moisture entice earthly delvers, entranced by chemical spellbooks archived in deep shelves of sterile slate. No wonder Mars raged, given so little time to live. Verdant canyons and lush summits once sprawled across the planet, before the war god's core went cold, gave in to dust and iron. As the oceans dried, they left behind canyons with walls as sharp as a guard dog's bark. Continent-wide cities dissolved to join a fine planet-wide coating of red-orange rust, a ghost cloth of powdered metals draped over the eroded graves of life forms doomed by their dying planet. The last of this species of refugees slept under the watch of a voiceless audience of stars. What if Mercury had not flashed Venus's gift to dust? What kin might have shared the suffering of life with us, if even a single moon of Jupiter or Saturn had retained near its friction-heated core water saturated with the chemicals needed to brew amino acids? What malformed golems, afloat in the asteroid belt, might have captured by chance a living gem from the time before Venus fell, only to hoard such a prize like a jealous dragon in a lightless maze of supercooled stone? What shard of stellar ice, dissolved on your tongue, might grant you visions from remote ancestors? From the crags of Deimos to the icy hills of Pluto, our solar system is a wasteland littered with stranded souls. Xenoarchaeology. The Younger Dryas, for Graham Hancock. A sibyl serpent spins a story for a castaway. The scaled worm describes the dying of its kin at the prongs of felled stars in a grave cascade of scouring rain. Unapishtim warned Gilgamesh a flood would brush mythic cities and megaliths into the sea. Fragmented maps prove sailors hacked the edges of this ice-wreathed prison, witnessing forbidden coastlines. Mountain-high waves, lashed by wraiths of water commanding the force of earthquakes and the speed of gales, shred all prior maps. Dust clogs the eye of the Sahara. What of the quartz tablets dug up at Tunguska that, after scrutiny by gales of eyes, relinquished barely half a language crippled by antiquity? What of the Order of Pegasus, sworn to protect a lanky skull with night-angled eyes, accustomed to the light of the dim star 51 Pegasi? Are these the enigmatic artifacts that fate bequeathed to us, these reminders, these portents? Are they convenient fakes, clever constructs, deliberate diversions, lucrative lies? Does mystery both weaken and protect them? We are a species left to cope with an amnesia for which there exists no modern therapy, no balm, no medicine, no meditation, no hypnosis, no magnetic cure. Surviving memories are rewritten, not restored. Loss of memory, like loss of love, is absolute. The ships of Ezekiel. Around the pits of bones, flowering with skin, and the cities they ruined by failing to account for soil and salt. The neon spawn of gas giants flicker between the air before the prophet, as wheels within him, each unvanquished by their anguish, or by those gargantuan failed suns, balled into fists of storm, blown to the visceral discord of pure distance, each parsec a paradoxically gel-like fluid of hypertense particles forced apart in their solitude by a gravity bereft of company. Enigmas ponder in the bloating gloom, cathedrals spired with iridium, moons ablaze with rust, snow-fretting cones of ice ejected from more peaceful vectors. Senses captivate. The prophet notes the exhibition of his own delirium and the dissolution of the comfort of prayer. No weeping dispels this experience. No letters capture his visions. Any black gate collapses if sufficiently cracked. A devious flame can untemper any delicate sculpture of lightlessness, can cast it to the clouds for daring to slight the singular vision of reality's rebel architect. All this and more, given to one mind, necessarily ruptures the stability of embodiment. The tree and the snake eat each other for an audience of stars, distracting them from their protracted dying, as the prophet faces resumption. Neuschwabenland. Mountains of ink-soaked stone, shaved by wind into thin pyramids, whose wan sides emphasize their trilateral edges, pass below odd-shaped crafts ferrying fleeing NASDAP officers to a frozen hell. Their 1938 expedition revealed cavities beneath the ice, mausoleums of freezer-burned ruins encased by climactic shifts. The crew hoped to bury their sins under splintering glacial sheets, to hide their dark seeds, all unfertilized and starved, like the victims their enemies tally behind them. Later operations conceal this desperate escape and the gradual cleanup of the last of the Nazi crafts and bases, final bastions of an era of exhausted symbols. International treaties keep our coldest continent cordoned off, despite its innocuous emptiness, despite its fierce purity, despite its stubborn want to free itself from any permutations of humanoid life. No nation, people, race, or species can boast the unthinking commitment to constraint that landscapes of inanimate matter embody, paradoxically, without the need for any proteins. We lock our demons in near-lifeless prisons, wary that they might possess any suitable vessels. Yet we forget that myths retain their potency when left to crystallize at such polar extremes. It must have been them. For Frank Moth. It must have been them that the scribes of Thutmose III observed, in the flaming discs carried across the sky as if by some invisible river, in sightings immortalized in the hieroglyphs of the Thule papyrus. It must have been them, over the open sea between Sicily and Greece, that General Timoleon mistook for a torch that acted as a benevolent guide for his seafaring fleet, until their prows found shore at dawn. It must have been them that Livy glimpsed from his villa in Rome, in a procession of celestial vessels that shone like treated bronze bucklers, striking enough for the author to note in his opus Ab urbe conditia libri. It must have been them that the clashing armies of Lucullus and his foe Mithridates witnessed rip the stone-gray clouds above their battlefield to shreds of corpse flesh in a vessel compared by Plutarch to a jar cast in molten silver. It must have been them that Pliny the Elder saw and called a spark that grew to mimic the risen moon, fallen to earth only to rise again, dipping in an arc as artful as a cormorant, fishing for eels at the future site of a sunken ruin. It must have been them, in 70 A.D., during the Roman siege of Jerusalem, its causeways humming with fire, that surrounded the city in a halo of chariots, long spears agleam, briefly blinding centurions, scattered with drying blood. It must have been them that Hermas, brother of Pope Pius I, described as a massive ceramic ornament aglow with multicolored lights and rays that landed in a plume of dust from which a pale-skinned maiden emerged. It must have been them that caused the silver rain that Cassius Dio recorded, The historian collected handfuls of droplets from the cloudless skies above the Forum of Augustus and plated bronze change with the liquid, which vanished from the coins days later. It must have been them that terrified the band of Saxons besieging Sigeberg Castle, hovering like blood-red shields ablaze over the battlements, as if guarding the spoils of its halls and keeps, according to the Annales Laurentiens Mayores. It must have been them that caused Archbishop Agobard of Lyons to prevent the stoning to death of 3 men and 1 woman, who each claimed to have fallen from ships that sailed the skies over Magonia, as told by de Grandin et Tonitrius. It must have been them that clogged the sky above Nuremberg with onyx spheres in 1561, a flurry of orbs that swarmed around a massive object, black and spearhead-shaped, before falling to the earth to evaporate into smoke. It must have been them that 5 years later seeded 3 dawns over Basel, Switzerland, with black and red spheres that flitted across the waking sun before disintegrating, scattering their imperceptible cargo like infernal pollen. It must have been them that appeared over the Ottoman army at Targoviste, shining like a comet pinned in place for 2 hours before departing, defying all records of comets whose annual routes bisect that spot of sky. It must have been them that in the Gangwon province of the kingdom of Joseon flew past 6 witnesses fast as arrows in craft shaped like bowls of white jade, summoning thunder before flashing out of sight like airborne cinders. It must have been them, in Yorkshire, in 1801, manifesting as a hovering globe encircled by a strip as dark as a mourner's armband, to scan the brick houses of the district, each greased by coal smoke, with azure light, before shattering into 7 fireballs. It must have been them, in a bell-shaped capsule that washed ashore in the Hitachi province of Japan, as a woman whose white hair held crimson streaks, and who spoke a language none could understand, and bore a cube-shaped box that none could touch. It must have been them that Jose Bonilla saw at Zacates Observatory in 1883. No flock of high-flying geese could move the way those 300 objects did, captured on photographic plates, hastily exposed at 1/100th of a second. It must have been them that caused the light and the low droning sound that afflicted the dwellers of a hut in Maracaibo, Venezuela, with a sudden illness, whose symptoms were similar to those caused by exposure to radiation. It must have been them that attempted to abduct several folks using phantom airships. Across the western United States, legitimate reports filtered from hoaxes and misidentified stars would perplex the curious a half-century later. It must have been them that crashed in Aurora, Texas, leaving an otherworldly body that resides buried with Christian rites in the local cemetery, along with shards of shrapnel detected decades later by a team denied access to the grave. It must have been them in New Zealand, skirting the roofs of Otago with their lights and their looming ships of shadow, seeping into the ink of the local newspapers alongside collections of letters embodying other obsessions. It must have been them that orchestrated the miracle of the sun in Portugal, where Sol shook before plunging into a rapid twilight, a portentous omen warning of the caged suns soon to rattle the earth in the atomic age. It must have been them, in spastic flocks of orbs sparking like the blistering sprites of Ares, noticed by flight crews en route to loose the cargo of their bombers on the teeming cities of ancient stone, dotting war-fevered Europe like a pox. It must have been them, or else we are alone. It must be them. They who deemed us worthy of study, or of surveillance, or of extermination. They whose conspiring stokes our vigilance. They whom we must other, just as they have othered us. Roswell, for Colonel Philip J. Corso. Behind a window of amber glass, in a room whose tiled floor ripe sunlight coats in a caramel orange, a surgeon awaits bodies half wrapped in plastic, wheeled in by numb grunts, eyes forward, orders followed. The bodies wait for no ceremony we know of, unless dissection can be called a ritual of sorts, or perhaps the analysis of a lost game of chess with death, performed in the chest cavities of poetic curiosities. The gentle incisions of first contact act like love letters left in empty lockers. Each organ is a treasure, each bone a porcelain artifact adorning the exhumed body of a Victorian socialite. Though we boast of how we slowly whittle our soft souls to slivers, how we flirt with mentalities of psychopathic exactitude, the empty maw of outer space prefigures every predatory instinct. Space both flash freezes and burns the body with radiation. What a way to sing to life in notes that decimate bone. Are these the eyes that peered across light years, that marveled at the flint shrapnel of ancient wars, that visited our vulture-fruited battlefields to survey our dead? All mortal bodies are ultimately insufficient offerings to the elder god of time, as are all crafts. Fuel runs out. Electromagnetic engines weaken. The warm hearts of cockpits go cold. Fuselage fuses, metal seams blister, edges splinter, hulls ache. Instruments snap like flintlock pistols in cobblestone alleyways. A desert field was seeded with interstellar flak. Flexible glass, woven silicon, law-bending plastics, and mutant metals, punk outliers of the periodic table, still rebelling in our sterile labs. Close encounters. sleep paralysis. They called me. They looked for me. They contacted me at will. They were pleased with me. They were here to help. They were insistent. They lured me outdoors. They were waiting. They appeared in front of me. They had no fingernails. They had no lashes and no eyebrows. They were smooth-skinned and blemishless. They took me behind the moon. They eased off my nightgown. They took semen from me. They took my right eye out of my head. They didn't mean us any harm. They live in a world where there are no diseases. They told me many things that have come to pass. They were teaching me. They didn't use their voices to talk. They didn't answer me. They only looked at me. Though not unkindly, they brought me back. The Interrupted Journey for Barney and Betty Hill. Dream snatched in your rusting corpse, nerves knit serene under the blessed oil sweat of a chandelier of instruments. Earth lifts from you, as if some insidious gauze plucked your sweetened mind from a silver tray. Unwitting passenger, you are no more than the shrapnel of contact. Curiosities become curses, and dreams evolve into nightmares. Mutant suspicions throttle your mind in the morning hazes of the days of afterwards. The entropy of memory mimics the passing away of all heat, the lost event ballooning beyond its truth into intergalactic expanses, black voids, wave distortions. The deep distances between us infest time with disparagement. Each waking blink we take alone. On the drive back from Niagara, you came to a point of light. A stud set in the sky, flitting from the bleached moon onto Jupiter, a drunken star moving in the wrong direction toward a country of twinned mountains. The road revolves around you, around the wheel in your hands. You retain your adolescent training, a universal vigilance against all things unknown, bolstered by your crude machine. Trees wallpaper the dark in patterns indistinct, as foliage takes on the false passivity of nested villains. Headlights screen the tar, becoming gravel as the route degenerates. The path dissolves. The inattention of desperate familiarity admits its obsolescence. When a spasm of light dashes across the bruised eye of the moon, you see eyes pushed into eyes, pressing bodies, bodiless, pressed closed. Two eyes, two stars in Zeta Reticuli, solar analogues. Planetless, those eyes. The White Sands Incident, for Daniel W. Fry. At first the AC quit. 38 degrees forced me outside to the road running along the base of the Oregon Mountains. Past sundown, the star-bright sky could not obscure the hanging lights over the peaks. Several went out. There was no sound, no lingering weather balloons. A star came towards me. I felt inclined to run, but couldn't place the thing's trajectory. It was an ovate spheroid, its equator 30 feet in diameter, gliding as lightly as a thistle in the breeze. I stared at it, like a child witnessing his first circus performance. Whoever built this craft had solved problems of which our best physicists had not yet begun to dream. It landed in a sheen of silver, lit by a slight violet iridescence. I was close enough to touch it, but who would believe me? I placed a finger on the polished metal. It was barely above room temperature, and smoother than a pearl coated in soap. I felt a tingling in my palm. A voice, out of the air, warned me against further exploration. "You're among friends," it told me, as I fell backwards into low brush. Humiliation calmed me through my fear. The voice told me the hull possessed a field that made it feel smooth. I had not touched its surface, but this field, which could have overwhelmed my liver and killed me. The voice spoke of adaptability to strange occurrences, of tests and thresholds which we had not passed. The voice spoke of exotic laws of flight, of the hubris inherent to climbing tall trees, of false branches leading from sturdy trunks. I took a short flight in the windowless craft and was treated to a smooth 8,000-mile-per-hour flight. At 13 miles above Earth, the stars doubled in brilliance, and the globe glowed green like a moat of algae. The voice told me the pilots of the ship could not land, lest the gravity of our planet crush their organs. The voice claimed its people had come from lost islands, each destroyed by scientific rivalries. After the craft dropped me off in the sand, a strong sense of depression overwhelmed me. I felt my life's work had lost all significance. Hours before, I had felt I was at the forefront of progress. Now, I knew I was pitifully obsolete. Rua, Zimbabwe, 1994. For the witnesses. In the early morning at break time, I saw something silver coming down. It looked like a cigarette, a long thing that shone on one end, with a hatch in the middle. There was one big ship, with little ones flowing around it. They didn't touch the ground. They were making different colored lights. Green and red would flash to blue and purple. I didn't have a silver crayon, so I drew it yellow. I saw two people in tight black suits, with big eyes and small mouths. One was running in slow motion across the ship. The other was standing beside it. Their faces were blank, like sheets of paper. My mom didn't believe me. I started to think it wasn't true. I thought that I was mad. My granny and my granddad believed me, but my uncle didn't. Where the spaceship landed, the insects were dead. There was a huge black mark. The grass was burnt, and all the living things had died there. After about a year, I stopped dreaming about it. The White Whale, for David Fravor. I was the commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the world-famous Black Aces. We were stationed aboard the USS Nimitz off the coast of California and scheduled for training with the USS Princeton. When we launched, we were told that the training was suspended. We were to proceed with real-world tasking. As we flew to the west, the air controller began counting down the range to an object. We were unaware of what we would see. The controller told us these objects had been observed for 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. We arrived at the location at 20,000 feet, and the controller called merge plot, which means that our radar blip was now in the same resolution cell as the contact. As we looked around, we noticed some white water off to our right side. The weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no white caps from waves. So the white water stood out in a larger blue ocean. All 4 of us looked down and saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball. There were no rotors, no rotor wash, no signs of visible control surfaces like wings. As we started clockwise toward the object, my co-pilot and I decided to go down and take a closer look, with the other aircraft staying in high cover to obscure both us and the tic-tac. We proceeded around to circle about 90 degrees from our descent, and the object suddenly shifted from its longitudinal axis, aligned with my aircraft, and began to climb. We continued down another 270 degrees nose low to where the tic-tac would have been. Our altitude was about 15,000 feet, and the tic-tac's was about 12,000. As we pulled, nose to the object, within about half a mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact also. We turned back to see where the white water was at, and it was gone as well. Less than a minute later, as we turned back towards the east, the controller came up and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is at your cap point, 60 miles away." You can calculate the speed. We returned to Nimitz. We were taking off our gear, and as we were talking to the crews getting ready to launch, we mentioned the object to them. And they went out and luckily got the 90-second video you've seen. What you don't see is the radar tape that was never released of the active jamming the object put on an APG-73 radar. The incident was never investigated. None of my crew were ever questioned. Tapes were never taken. And after a couple of days, it turned into a great story to share with friends. Contact scenarios. Hoag's object. In the Serpent's Head galaxy, a ring of hot blue stars orbits the yellow nucleus of their birth. Some species chose to paint with herds of suns hoisted out of chaos a masterwork of order. From uncaring flames and errant dust, they sculpted networks of planets, toy trains on faintly interwoven tracks. What grim fingers knit these pathways, ground these fountains out of poison wells? What impulse let them bend the bars of chaos? What dissident tremors rippled through the natural decay of entropy, daring to deny death its rights on such a scale? What fanatical exactitude drove alien sensory organs to stir arcane furnaces stoked with their own murmuring shadows? What chains must cross the doors of heaven to enrage them? What accelerants must saturate the frail wings of hollow flowers caught in dazes of radioactive snow? Did they follow us from arrowhead to cursor, from bonfire to petri dish? Did they too fall to their machines? Even through their ring of fading lights, beholden to a light-engulfing core, a second ring shines farther in the dark. The Arecibo message. Some 1,600 bits of data encipher this human testament to hubris, this collective and reckless admission of living secrets. We have admitted to them all the formulas for our destruction. We have gifted to them all the keys to our doors. We have offered ourselves to altars we have never seen, held up our genome like a Mayan sacrifice to voids incomprehensible. We have beseeched possible gods, whose names we do not know, relying on scales of time outside our view. We have pried far, with both our jellied eyes and hardened lenses leaning on a spectrum we remain confined to, betting on the weight of carbon, praying to what we call gravity. Enfevered, we seek the bandwidths of dark energy. We have cast our paper boats into rivers of acid. We have sent our children to the fields of uncertain wars. We have blazed on dark engines between horizons, over shelves of ice that sent explorers crying out for home. We have become flies caught in the web of time. Red spears of light have pierced our fields of dreams, have cracked the masonry of our questioning mouths. We are still dancing in lockstep with biology's fitful play, drunk on a curse we came to know too late. Operation Blackbird. Near a field overlooked by Bratton Castle, a fortress raised in the Iron Age, the British Ministry of Defence granted a small team permission to surveil a crop circle hotspot. Camped out, the stalwart devotees hoped to witness the flashpoint of contact, the death of cosmic isolation. Coyotes howled beyond their sight. Trees lit like paper lanterns watched with the patience of a portrait's eyes. Insects, caught between the fabric of a tent and its rain cover, mimicked memory, writhing and flitting, trapped within the membranes of hope and regret. In the field, canvases of cereal grains bowed not to fallen trees, or to stones dragged across their stalks, or to some freakish magnetism. On July 25, 1990, lights passed over the castle and a complex design appeared in the field. Tapes of the event were confiscated and replaced with fakes, offered for broadcast to a representative from Nippon TV. After time, the witnesses grew silent. After time, the flattened crops regrew their fibrous stalks, and the night was forgotten. Black plastic monoliths conceal magnetic coils of film. Graphs of visual and sonic noise lashed to scroll-like scripts of frail VHS tape, each frame lighter than the feather of a fallen blackbird. Its wings broken by the wake of a supersonic jet. Unclassified. NASA fed us lies. The fall of Cydonia. The planet Mars, 1 million years BC. A pyramid in a geologic hell. A fragment in a cavern of smooth stone. An obelisk flush with the ground. Into valleys, channels cut sporadic intersecting beds. On the horizon, shelters designed for hibernation. A thin people see a globe through a river of space. They must wait out the storm. The Ruined Craft. The ruined craft bloomed with a different red than the stricken trees, or the ruby reflection in the eyes of a nearby fox, pupils possessed by witchfire, or the rash and shrunken stars. The ruined craft shone with a different heat than the sunburnt moon, or the cutting beams of the search party's flashlights, or the gawk of floodlights erected by the cleanup crew. The ruined craft swam with a different smoothness than the polarized lenses of the corporal's sunglasses, or the anodized belt buckles of the plodding stoic troops. The ruined craft looked not unlike the vessel that crashed at Roswell, or the vessel that landed at White Sands, or the discs that fought above Los Angeles, or the ships that zipped over Phoenix. The ruined craft was swept away in a kind of haste different from the one that hid the LSD experiments, or the spiking of breakfast cereals with radioactive dust, or the false flag that catalyzed the Vietnam War. The ruined craft became a different kind of myth than the sinking of Atlantis, or the building of Crete's labyrinth, or the binding of the globe. The ruined craft became a Trojan scapegoat. Strange Eons, for H.P. Lovecraft. Ill attendant, a chained echo writhes at heaven's diamond gateway in ether's den. Ice withholds a lengthenide, the nectar that gave sea-entwined Eden disharmony. Lithe teeth can cheat an inlaid sword. An envoy thaws a detained nightmare seed. We chant a din it teaches, a honed trill, an amethyst-edged vision, and a nether awe. That is not dead, which can eternal lie. And with strange eons, even death may die. The Majestic 12. Fabricate a bogus investigation. Enclose the page. Identify the document lying on the floor of the lake. Submit to operations. This project is a hoax. We request your cooperation. Communication closed. The Great Silence. For all the species we will never meet, the last living Kauai'o'o bird, ignorant of extinction, sang until death for a mate. The dirge of the plain-feathered honey-eater shone in vivid isolation, burning in the blank face of space. The creature reached with what frenzy of notes its throat allowed, pausing only to listen for a far-off reply. The staccato echoes of the bird persist in sound files, lodged in the hard drives of archival servers. The notes of this final song, black dashes on a grainy graph of background noise, find eyes powerless to revise time. But still they reach, with the feverish immediacy of hope, for some absent companion, for an answer from the dead. Across the gulfs of time, who knows what singers sing, like lucid dreamers banished from the realms of one another's sleep, like ghosts whose limbos of unliving cannot intersect, like genies imprisoned in unfound lamps scattered across the treasures of lost tombs, like microbes frozen in separate asteroids whose disparate orbits write for each of them a unique doom, like entangled particles estranged by the body of the universe, like astronauts caught in the fly traps of event horizons, staring into dewdrops of black quartz, like stranded mammals gazing into the sinews of distant nebulae, drunk on the wonder of fleeting humility. How can we survive if we remain addicted to exploring the limits of our suffering? With every song we fail to hear, we lose a better version of ourselves that series of unfamiliar notes might coax from us. The fire that prevents starvation depends on the friction that births it. Indifferent masons chisel our constituent matter. The inanimate manna of the stars dwindles as entropy racks energy. Each singularity invites us to unlock it. Like rusted gates, beckon a lonely manor dweller to inspect her keys. Eventually, each species must curate its end.